You're just dead weight, Erica. His words slammed into me harder than any slap could. The restaurant went silent. Clink of forks stopped midair. Mark's friends looked from him to me, waiting for me to laugh along. He smirked, sipping his wine like he'd just told a harmless joke. My chest tightened. I stared at the candlelight shaking between us, pretending the tears forming in my eyes were from the smoke. My husband, my partner, was humiliating me in public again. "Come on, babe," he said, still smiling. "You know I'm kidding." But he wasn't. Everyone knew he wasn't. I forced a smile so tight it hurt. "Of course," I whispered. My hand gripped the stem of my glass. If I spoke, I'd cry. If I cried, he'd win. So I said nothing. That was the night I stopped being his wife and started being his lesson. 3 months later, we were in a courtroom. Same smirk. Same man. But this time, I had something he didn't. Evidence. And when I opened the folder on my lap, the sound of paper sliding free was louder than his laugh ever was. After that dinner, I went home in silence. Mark hummed beside me, tapping the steering wheel. He didn't even notice my shaking hands. "Erica, lighten up," he said. "They know I'm joking." "Do they?" I asked quietly. He rolled his eyes. "You're too sensitive." Sensitive. That word had become his favorite weapon. Every insult he threw turned into my fault for feeling it. When we got home, he kissed my cheek like nothing had happened and went to bed. I stood in the dark kitchen staring at our wedding photo. The girl in white looked hopeful, soft. I wanted to tell her to run. Instead, I wiped my tears, took a deep breath, and whispered, "Not yet," because I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. My name is Erica Vaughn, and for 10 years I built the life he bragged about. I worked double shifts to help him start his business. I paid the rent, balanced the books, cooked, cleaned, smiled. When his mother got sick, I quit my job to take care of her. He called me selfless. Then later, he called me lazy. Change was slow, like watching a flower wilt day by day. He started correcting me in front of people. Then he stopped listening at all. I thought if I just tried harder, he'd love me again. But the harder I tried, the smaller I became. Until one night, I overheard him on the phone saying, "She thinks she actually owns part of the company." Laughter followed. His laughter. Something cold settled in my stomach. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just listened, memorizing every word. 'Cause love was over. Tragedy had begun. The next morning, I made him breakfast. He kissed my forehead and told me he had meetings all day. I nodded, smiling, even though my chest still burned. When the door closed behind him, I sat at the table with my laptop. I opened every email, every document, every invoice. I wanted to see what my lazy hands had actually built. Hours passed. My coffee went cold. Then I found it. His name on transfers I never signed, money moving through hidden accounts. My fingers trembled. My breath hitched. I took screenshots, printed records, stored everything on a flash drive. When he came home that night, I was still at the table. "Rough day?" he asked. I looked up and smiled. "Just thinking." He kissed my cheek again, completely unaware. For the first time in years, I didn't feel powerless. I felt awake. Days turned into weeks. I gathered everything quietly. Emails, receipts, contracts. Every lie he'd told had a paper trail, and I followed it like breadcrumbs. Dinners, he still bragged. At parties, he still called me sweet but clueless. His friends laughed. I poured their wine and smiled. Inside, I was counting down. One evening, my friend Lacey noticed. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm fine," I said. "Just learning." "Learning what?" "How to let someone destroy themselves." She blinked. "You're scaring me." I laughed softly. "Don't worry. I'm done being scared." That night, I placed the flash drive in a box labeled tax records and hid it under the floorboard in my closet. Mark thought I was folding, but I was building, piece by piece, the truth that would end him. Mark loved to host parties. He'd fill the house with his friends, loud men with expensive watches and fake laughs. I became the decoration, moving quietly with trays of food and polite smiles. At one party, he wrapped an arm around my waist and said, "She's not really into business talk." "Right, honey?" Everyone laughed. I froze. My cheeks burned. I forced a smile and nodded. Inside, I felt like a shadow fading under his spotlight. Later, I stood at the sink washing glasses while their laughter carried from the living room. The noise hurt my chest like tiny knives. But as I stared at the bubbles swirling down the drain, something shifted. I realized they only laughed because they believed him. And they believed him because I let them. That night, I looked at my reflection and whispered, "You won't laugh forever, Mark." My voice trembled, but it was the first time I'd spoken to myself like someone worth hearing. A week later, I met Lacey for coffee. She'd been my friend since college, the one who never liked Mark. "You look tired," she said softly. "I'm fine," I lied. She looked at me for a long time before sliding a small card across the table. "She's a lawyer. Her name's Ms. Dalton. You might need her." I stared at the name, my throat tight. "I don't think I can do that." "Erica," she said, "you can't keep surviving on hope." That night, I sat in my car outside the law office for 30 minutes before walking in. My hands were shaking so badly I had to hold them together. When Ms. Dalton looked up from her desk and smiled, something inside me cracked. I told her everything, his words, his laughter, the hidden accounts. She listened quietly, then said, "You've already done the hardest part. You stopped pretending." Ms. Dalton was calm, sharp, and terrifying in the best way. For the first time in years, someone was on my side. We met every Thursday morning in a quiet office with coffee that tasted like courage. I brought documents, she brought strategy. "You're building a case," she said, arranging my files in perfect order. "He's been transferring company funds under your name. That's fraud." The word hit me like a jolt. Fraud. It meant he wasn't just cruel, he was criminal. I stared at the papers, at the proof of what I'd helped create. My stomach twisted. "How long do these things take?" I asked. "As long as it takes to make him underestimate you," she said. So I smiled that night when he came home. I laughed at his jokes. I kissed him goodnight. And while he slept, I lay beside him planning the ending of the man who called me dead weight. Mark started noticing my calmness. "Something's different about you," he said one morning as I made coffee. "Maybe I'm just learning not to overthink," I said. He smiled, thinking he'd fixed me. He had no idea that every morning after he left, I met with Ms. Dalton and watched his empire slowly crumble on paper. We found more: contracts he forged, properties he hid, debts he pretended didn't exist. Every lie was another brick in the wall closing around him. At night, he'd tell me stories about how smart businessmen know how to move money quietly. I'd nod and say, "You're brilliant." But in my head, I whispered, "You're finished." Each secret I uncovered wasn't just revenge. It was clarity. The man I thought I loved never existed. I'd built him out of trust, and he'd built me out of convenience. The night of his birthday, the house was full again. Music, wine, laughter. I wore the red dress he liked, the one he called my showpiece. He stood on a chair, drunk on his own pride. "I wouldn't be here without my amazing wife," he said, slinging his arm around me. "Even though she doesn't understand the business side of things, she's great moral support." Laughter. Again. I smiled for the camera flashes, feeling numb. When they left, he sat on the couch counting envelopes of money from gifts. "You were quiet tonight," he said. "I'm learning to listen," I replied. He laughed. "Finally." He didn't know I'd already delivered our entire company's financial records to Ms. Dalton that morning. He didn't know that each glass of wine I poured at that party was a goodbye toast. To him, to us, to the woman I used to be. The morning after the party, Mark was hungover and irritable. "Why didn't you remind me to pay the decorator?" he snapped. "You know I forget things when I drink." I said nothing. I just placed a folder on the table. "What's this?" he asked, frowning. "Receipts," I said. "In case you ever forget who keeps this house running." He laughed. "Oh, come on, Erica. Don't start getting dramatic." But as I turned away, he didn't notice my trembling hands turn into fists. He didn't see how my reflection in the glass door stopped looking scared and started looking steady. That evening, when he went out again, I stayed up printing every receipt, contract, and email I'd found. Each click of the printer was a heartbeat of defiance. Every sheet of paper was a piece of me taking shape again. When the printer jammed, I whispered, "You can't stop me now, Mark." The machine whirred and kept going. Days turned into weeks, and my double life grew thicker. In the daylight, I was the obedient wife. At night, I was the ghost in his files. Ms. Dalton called one morning. "We've built enough for the first legal step," she said. I froze. "Already?" She smiled through the phone. "You did well. Now we wait for his next mistake." And it came sooner than expected. That evening, he stormed into the kitchen, waving a letter. "Why is the tax office asking about my company records?" I blinked. "Your accountant's name is still on the letterhead. Maybe they're checking standard stuff." He muttered curses, pacing. His voice shook, not with anger but fear. I watched him crumble, piece by piece, and it felt both painful and powerful. The man who once called me useless now looked lost. And I realized that the loudest men fall the hardest when silence finally answers them. By now, every smile I gave him was rehearsed. He believed me again, almost too easily. He even kissed my forehead one night and said, "I like this calmer version of you." I bit my tongue to stop the laugh that wanted to escape. Calm? He mistook peace for weakness again. But this time, I didn't argue. I let him live in that illusion because it was the safest cage I could build. Behind the calm, Ms. Dalton and I were preparing something bigger, a quiet strike that would expose all his fake investments. I'd learned to fake everything, even my heartbeat. Some nights, I still cried in the shower, thinking of the girl who once loved him. But I also whispered, "You're almost free." And for the first time in years, the mirror didn't reflect a victim. It reflected a storm waiting for the right thunder. Mark had a friend named Colin, loud, rich, smug. The kind of man who bragged about taming women. One evening, they were on the patio drinking whiskey. I brought snacks, quiet as usual. Colin smirked. "Man, you've got it easy. Erica's the silent type, huh?" Mark laughed, his words slurred. "She's like a pet, needs feeding, not thinking." The words hit me harder than a slap. But this time I didn't flinch. I looked right at him, smiled sweetly, and said, "Then maybe it's time you learn to feed yourself." The silence that followed could have cracked glass. Colin burst into laughter, but Mark just stared at me like he didn't recognize me. That night, he didn't touch me, didn't speak. But I could feel his anger, thick and sour in the air. He was losing control, and I was no longer pretending to give it back. The next morning, I found my wedding ring on the dresser. He'd left it there like an unspoken warning. I picked it up, staring at the band. It used to mean forever. Now it looked like a small, shining lie. I placed it in the drawer and closed it gently. Then I called Ms. Dalton. "It's time," I said. Her voice didn't waver. "Are you sure?" "Yes. He won't see it coming." That afternoon, while he was at a business lunch, I packed my essentials, just a suitcase and a folder. When he returned, the house was clean, quiet, and empty. Only one thing sat on the kitchen counter, his favorite whiskey glass and a single note. "You said I was dead weight." Let's see how high you fly without me. Then I walked out. The air outside felt different. Colder, sharper, but free. I drove to a small apartment I'd rented under my maiden name months ago. It was barely furnished, but it was mine. No shouting. No silent punishments. Just the hum of the fridge and my own breathing. That first night, I slept on the couch, clutching my folder of documents like a lifeline. For the first time in years, I dreamed without fear. When I woke up, I turned on my phone to dozens of missed calls. Mark. Then came the texts. You think you can just leave? You'll come crawling back. No one will believe you. I stared at the screen, shaking. Then I forwarded every message to Ms. Dalton. Her reply came fast. Perfect. Now we have proof of emotional harassment. Stay calm. I smiled through tears. For once, my silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Mark showed up at my apartment 2 days later. He banged on the door until the hallway echoed. Erica! Open up. You're embarrassing yourself. I didn't move. I watched him through the peephole, his perfect hair messy, eyes wild. I made you who you are, he yelled. Without me, you're nothing. That line, those words, were the final match to every hidden wound. I stepped closer to the door and whispered so low he couldn't hear me. You made me forget who I was. I'm taking her back. Through a few more minutes of shouting, he stormed off. I stood there shaking, half terrified, half exhilarated. Because in that moment, I realized something I'd never dared believe before. He wasn't the monster I thought he was. He was small. And I had finally outgrown him. Ms. Dalton and I filed everything. Joint account misuse, falsified contracts, hidden debts he'd pinned under my name. Court date was set. But before that, Mark tried one last performance. He called our old friends, pretending to be the heartbroken husband. He told them I'd gone unstable, that I'd run off with his money. I knew because one of our mutual friends, Melissa, secretly called me. Erica, he's lying about you, she whispered. He said you stole from him. I laughed softly. Let him. The truth has better timing. The next day, his bank accounts were frozen. His company flagged for audit. He called me, voice trembling. What did you do? Nothing, I said. You did it to yourself. When I hung up, my hands were still shaking, but this time not from fear. From freedom. Courtroom was colder than I expected. My heels clicked on the marble floor as I entered, my lawyer beside me. Mark was already there, tan fading, suit too big now, smile forced. He tried to whisper something as I sat, but I didn't look his way. When the judge began reading the evidence, the room went quiet. Every lie he'd told, every signature he'd forged, every bank transfer. It was all there, stacked neatly like bricks in a wall that would soon close in on him. He kept looking at me, waiting for a reaction. I gave him nothing. Just calm, cold clarity. Then Ms. Dalton stood, voice steady. Your Honor, this man built his entire lifestyle on deception and cruelty. My client only asks for fairness and her freedom. For the first time, I saw his smile vanish completely. The verdict came down 2 weeks later. He lost everything. Half his assets went to cover the debts he'd hidden in my name. His company collapsed under investigation. And his so-called friends disappeared like smoke. He tried to approach me in the parking lot after the hearing. You ruined me, he shouted. You'll regret this. I looked him in the eye, calm as ever. No, Mark, I said. You ruined you. I just stopped carrying the weight. He opened his mouth, but no words came. When I turned away, the sunlight hit my face, soft, warm, and forgiving. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. A week after the verdict, I got a call from Melissa. Erica, you need to see this, she said. They're talking about him on the news. I turned on the TV. Mark's face filled the screen, once confident, now pale and sweaty. Local businessman investigated for tax fraud and financial misconduct. I stood frozen. The man who once made me feel invisible was now exposed for the world to see. They showed footage of him leaving his office, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions he couldn't answer. My throat tightened. I didn't smile. I didn't cheer. I just whispered, "It's over." Then, quietly, I sat down and cried. Not tears of sadness, but release. Years of silence pouring out at once. 'Cause justice doesn't always sound like thunder. Sometimes it's just the sound of your own breath coming back to you. In the weeks that followed, I focused on myself. I started volunteering at a women's shelter downtown, helping others rebuild from the kind of wreckage I'd crawled through. One woman, trembling, asked me, "How did you leave?" I smiled softly. One page at a time. At night, I'd journal every memory I'd buried. Each word was a wound closing. Then, one afternoon, I got a letter in the mail, from Mark. I almost threw it away, but curiosity made me open it. Inside was one line. "You win. I hope you're happy." For a moment, I stared at it. Then I folded it once, calmly, and dropped it in the trash. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about finally being free. Months passed. My little apartment began to feel like home. I painted the walls soft yellow, bought plants, and learned to laugh without looking over my shoulder. One morning, I met someone new, not in a romantic way, but as a reminder that kindness still existed. A bookstore owner named Daniel offered me a job part-time. "You have a calm energy," he said. "People trust that." I almost laughed. If only he knew how hard I'd fought for that calm. As I shelved books and brewed coffee, I began to feel something I hadn't in years: lightness. Not the dizzy kind, but the peaceful kind. Sometimes I'd glance out the window and think of Mark. And instead of anger, I felt nothing. That's when I knew I'd truly healed. One crisp afternoon, I walked past a cafe and saw him sitting alone. Mark. He looked older. Thinner. The light in his eyes gone. His hands trembled as he stirred his coffee, staring at nothing. For a moment, our eyes met. He froze. I didn't. He opened his mouth to speak, but I just smiled gently and kept walking. No words. No revenge speech. No gloating. 'Cause I'd already said everything I needed to by surviving. And that small, silent moment, me walking past him without fear, was louder than any courtroom victory. Today, as I write this, the sunlight is streaming through my window. There's a cup of tea beside me, and my laughter doesn't sound strange anymore. People ask me if I regret anything. I don't. Because every cruel word he said built the backbone I stand on now. Once upon a time, he called me dead weight. Now I carry my own world. When I look back at the girl I was, the one who shook in silence, I want to tell her, "You weren't weak. You were waiting to remember your strength." And if you're listening to this, wondering if you'll ever get out, remember, revenge doesn't always need fire. Sometimes it just needs truth. And a good lawyer. Then I smile, close my notebook, and let the past stay exactly where it belongs. Behind me.